EVE Online frequently makes real-world headlines for its massive player-driven space battles that destroy hundreds of thousands of dollars in virtual assets. But the real story is found in the background. Every weapon and breached hull is the product of vast, ultra-realistic industrial supply chains. When the game developers introduced the Titan-class warship in 2005, they set the resource requirements so incredibly high that they assumed the player base would only ever manufacture a small handful. It took an entire year for a player alliance to gather enough materials to finish it. They launched it in late 2006, naming the flagship Steve, in honor of wildlife conservationist Steve Irwin, who passed away earlier that same year. This pie chart shows the total gross domestic product of that player alliance in 2006. Constructing Steve required 150 billion in-game credits, meaning 5% of their economic output was diverted into a single military asset. To contextualize that defense spending, imagine the United States government financing and constructing 74 Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carriers simultaneously. The completion of that first Titan required a massive, coordinated centralization of resources. It pushed the absolute limits of what the virtual world's economy could produce at the time. Today, the modern mega-coalitions of EVE Online operate entirely differently. Highly organized industrial players churn them out at a rate of hundreds per year, turning these once mythical warships into common, everyday commodities. This transition is driven by deep industrialization and a concept known as real price, the cost of an item after adjusting for inflation. Looking at this dual-axis chart, you can see how production efficiency impacts value. While a modern Titan costs about 50 billion credits on paper, adjusting for the massive in-game inflation shows that its real price has actually dropped to 1/20th of the 2006 original. Combine that cost reduction with the explosive economic growth of player nations over the last decade, and that same ship now accounts for a microscopic 0.0043. Even using the most efficient capital-class mining equipment available, a player would need to spend roughly 1 million man-hours just to pull the required raw ore out of asteroid belts. This supply and demand curve illustrates the second bottleneck, the commodity market. If an alliance tried to skip mining and simply buy the materials, the sudden spike in demand would instantly drain the entire game's market supply dry 4 times over, driving prices into the stratosphere. Assuming a group could patiently ride market over years to acquire those materials without triggering a price spike, the total cost would equate to roughly 2.4 million real-world US dollars. On this horizontal timeline, we can see the third and final bottleneck. In EVE Online, raw materials must be processed into components before final assembly. If a single in-game factory started processing these components today, the Keepstar wouldn't be finished until June of the year 3969. A single player's wealth cannot buy a Keepstar. The structure represents a hard mathematical wall of systemic bottlenecks that individual effort simply cannot break. The current consensus among players is that the Palatine Keepstar will never exist. However, this is the exact same assumption the developers originally made about the Titan class back in 2005. This diagram shows the player-engineered solution to that 1,950-year manufacturing bottleneck. Instead of a single facility, mega-coalitions organize hundreds of highly specialized parallel supply chains. By utilizing the collective capacity of thousands of players, that infinite timeline gets aggressively compressed into a realistic window. To pull this off, the player base will have to execute the virtual equivalent of the Manhattan Project or the Hoover Dam, requiring thousands of individuals to align their labor toward a single massive objective. As virtual economies mirror real-world principles, they continuously prove a very tangible reality. Relentless industrialization and collective human organization will inevitably scale to